Today is April 14th, 2018. The United States government claims to have bombed a Syrian chemical weapons factory and storage facilities in the country. Well, this is a complete lie. The fact is, the bombing of such targets have always been an easy way for United States presidents to deflect the public's attention away from his own domestic problems. If we look back at August of 1998, President Bill Clinton was in the middle of being investigated by a federal grand jury, and the media was salivating over the story. Much like this week, we have seen massive media coverage of Donald Trump on the ropes with all of the scandals and everything going on with the Mueller investigation. It was like that in August of 98 with Bill Clinton. Clinton had just spent 3 days giving testimony to a federal grand jury regarding his affair with Monica Lewinsky and how that related to getting Lewinsky to commit perjury on his behalf in the Paula Jones case that she had against the president. And with the media coverage not letting up, Clinton decided to try to deflect media attention away from him and this scandal by bombing Sudan. On August 20th, Bill Clinton used the U.S. military to launch a cruise missile attack against this alleged chemical weapons factory in Khartoum, Sudan. It was called Operation Infinite Reach. The British joined in. I think the French joined in. Very much like this strike that just happened in Syria. It was kind of the same thing. Well, the United States intelligence community, the CIA, they claimed to have gone in there to Khartoum and took soil samples from this plant that's there, and the soil samples proved that the plant was in fact producing VX nerve gas, and the intelligence operatives said that they were giving this nerve gas to Al-Qaeda. So Bill Clinton justified these strikes, saying that the free world must not let chemical weapons be produced to use against innocent people. But Sudan invited international inspectors to come in and check out the remains of the factory, to search through the rubble, do their scientific testing, look for any evidence at all that there was any kind of chemical weapons being produced there. And the investigation proved that Bill Clinton and the CIA were lying. There was absolutely no evidence of chemical weapons of any kind. Just like the Sudanese government claimed, it turned out the plant only produced regular pharmaceuticals, and their primary product was this horrifying and dangerous substance known as aspirin. The guy who owned the plant was a business guy named Salah Idris, and in the process of all of this happening, the United States had frozen his assets that he had in U.S. banks. So he sued the U.S. government over the bombing of his plant. In the Clinton administration, they decided to not challenge the lawsuit. They wanted to keep the story out of the news. It was a slam dunk for the businessmen. So they just went along with it. And they even admitted that Bill Clinton's administration, the decision to do this strike was based on faulty intelligence data, and the U.S. government had to release the $24 million in assets that they had seized from the business owner. Well, Clinton repeated this exact same tactic just a couple of months later in December, and I remember watching this attack unfold. I saw it live as it happened on television. It took place in December of 1998, and the reason I remember this is because all of the news networks were in the middle of covering the exact same story. Didn't matter what channel you flipped to, they were all showing live coverage of the United States House of Representatives. Why? Because they were in the middle of casting their votes to impeach or not impeach Bill Clinton. So everybody in America was watching this. That is until Bill Clinton suddenly decided to carry out another cruise missile strike against an alleged chemical weapons factory, but this time it was in Iraq. Let me go back and read a couple excerpts, couple paragraphs here from the New York Times article that described the incident. Quote, President Clinton ordered a strong, sustained series of airstrikes which is basically the exact same way that Donald Trump described his strikes, ordered a strong, sustained series of airstrikes against Iraq today, defending the attack as unavoidable, even as incensed congressional Republicans charged that it was politically timed to stave off the pending resolution to impeach him in the House of Representatives. Among the targets were suspected weapons plants, Iraqi intelligence agencies, and fortifications of the military unit known as the Republican Guard, which substantially survived the Persian Gulf War, despite weeks of sustained bombing. And I'll pause the reading right here just to point this out. Is that not exactly what Donald Trump just did? He targeted suspected weapons plants and also fortifications in this case, it was the Iranian Republican Guard instead of the Iraqi Republican Guard. Revolutionary Guard, rather. All right, let me continue the article. His decision was immediately endorsed by Prime Minister Tony Blair of Britain, who denounced Mr. Hussein as a serial liar. Quote, Saddam has no intention whatever of keeping his word, said Mr. Blair, who committed 12 Tornado fighter jets and 6 reconnaissance planes to the raids. All right, we just saw Prime Minister May do the exact same thing. Speaking from the Oval Office, Mr. Clinton said the mission of the raids was, quote, to protect the national interests of the United States and indeed the interests of people throughout the Middle East and around the world. Here's the last sentence here from Bill Clinton. He said, Saddam Hussein must not be allowed to threaten his neighbors or the world with nuclear arms, poison gas, or biological weapons. I mean, this is almost like Donald Trump was reading from a script that was written previously and used by the Clinton administration. The way the attack was carried out, what they targeted, the bogus intel from the CIA, it's all the same. Now, of course, in this attack on Iraq by Bill Clinton, it turned out there was no poison gases or biological weapons being produced at these factories. They did the same thing, went in and checked it out. Whoops. But Clinton had to say something to justify committing this nonsensical act of war in the middle of his impeachment vote. So yeah, it's biological weapons, sure. That's right, Clinton, biological weapons. Yeah, that's right, Trump. It's chemical weapons being developed. Sure, whatever. What's ironic here is that Bill Clinton's predecessor, George H.W. Bush, had done the exact same thing himself. Back in January of 1991, Bush Sr. carried out cruise missile strikes on an alleged chemical weapons factory in Baghdad, Iraq. And after the inspectors went in, following these strikes, they checked it out, did their chemical analysis, they discovered that Bush's chemical weapons factory turned out to be a baby formula manufacturing plant. Thank goodness the CIA and the President of the United States are in charge of protecting us, because there is no telling what would happen if the Iraqis had been able to carry out an attack against us with toxic baby milk. And, of course, we all know that Bush Sr.'s son, President George W. Bush, or the Shrub, as I like to call him, he did the same thing, but on a much grander scale than his father, or Clinton. George W. started the entire long-term war on Iraq based on fabricated claims of Iraq having chemical and biological weapons. And what did they say? The Bush Jr. administration, they said the same thing. We have irrefutable proof. They even sent Colin Powell out to the United Nations, and he held up a little vial that was supposed to be anthrax, saying, this is what we have proof. Saddam Hussein has mobile chemical weapons labs and biological labs where they're producing anthrax, and they're going to use it on us. It was all a lie. Well, now we get to President Donald Trump. At this point, if you've been watching my reports this week, most of you have seen well enough evidence to conclude that the alleged chemical attack in Douma, Syria was a staged event by Jaish al-Islam and by the White Helmets. President Assad did not use chemical bombs on the very people he was trying to liberate from those U.S.-backed terrorists. And among the targets that the United States and France and the UK struck in Trump's strike was a scientific research facility in Baraza, Syria. Trump said that the facility was producing chemical weapons. This facility is nestled right next to civilian apartments and housing complexes. If it is true that the USA was specifically choosing targets to avoid civilian casualties, they wouldn't have blown up a facility that they believed to be producing or storing chemicals that would have dispersed into the air and killed the locals living next to the facility. Trump knew that this facility in Baraza had no weapons or chemicals capable of producing chemical weapons. Just hours after the attack, you can see this in photos, workers from the facility and news crews showed up to examine the ruins. None of them are wearing any kind of protective gear as they searched the rubble. Why? Because they knew there was nothing in it that could hurt them. In fact, several workers went on camera to tell anybody who would listen that their facility that they used to be employed at had nothing to do with producing dangerous weapons. They told news crews that the main thing they produced there was antidote for snake bites. Now, U.S. and Syrian government statements indicate that while there were civilian injuries, there were no casualties. I don't know if that's true. Al Sura, a news site, reported last night that 4 civilians living at the next-door housing complex for the poor, 4 of them were killed during the strikes. So it may be that Al Sura got the report wrong. I can't say for sure yet. I'm still trying to find additional sources. The problem is that it is in the interest of both the United States and Syria to publicly deny that there were any casualties. For the USA, they want to make sure and tell the public that they were so careful, they were very good, didn't hurt anyone. Don't be mad at us, we didn't even hurt anyone. The Syrian government, on the other side, they want the U.S. strikes to look so weak that they didn't even kill a single person. That way they can say, hey, look at us, we're so tough, we stood up to cruise missile strikes that didn't even kill a single person. So we've got propaganda on both sides. This is what is called the fog of war, and it can be very difficult sometimes to get to the truth. But here is the truth I do want you all to understand. Donald Trump did something that is not new, the use of cruise missile strikes to blow up these alleged chemical weapons factories that is based on zero credible evidence. That's a practice that has been used by most, if not all, of the recent presidents. But that does not excuse Donald Trump. So for those who voted for Trump because you believed he was going to be different, he was going to go drain the swamp, he was going to get us out of Syria, he was not going to take us to war, I hope that by now, this being the second time he has done this, I hope you can see at this point that Donald Trump is just as corrupt as his predecessors. It is my belief that any man who would spend hundreds of millions of tax dollars to marshal a massive military buildup, a multiple nation buildup, and send 100 cruise missiles flying to blow up targets that he knows full well are not chemical weapons factories, I say that such a man is an evil spawn of Satan. Can you imagine the terror, the horror in the minds and hearts of the children and the families around Damascus, around Baraza, around these sites where these cruise missiles are raining down? Can you imagine the screams of the children as they hear things blowing up around them? I cannot see how anyone who has any conscience whatsoever, any sense of morality, can support what Donald Trump just did. And going forward, I see how nobody can support Donald Trump for anything, because I don't. At this point, I hope that Donald Trump gets impeached. What he did was unconstitutional. We got that from Barack Obama. We got that from George W. Bush, from Bill Clinton, from George H.W. Bush. I am sick and tired of these men in the White House ignoring the rule of law that the rest of us are required to follow and doing whatever they want, causing terror in the hearts of innocent people, and they do it with the American flag draped around them. Not in my name. No more. I don't care if the next person in office is bad. I will see when that time comes. But for now, I know that the one we currently have in office is bad, and I want to see him impeached and removed from office before this maniac gets us into an even greater war. Because if you think this is over, it's not. Donald Trump fought for days with Secretary of Defense Mad Dog Jim Mattis. Trump wanted a much grander, much bigger event than what he got. Mattis stood against him. Mattis said, "No, are you crazy?" On one side of the table, there was Donald Trump and National Security Advisor John Bolton, who Trump brought in just for this, for war. Mattis said, "Are you crazy? Look at what's going to happen. Russia is not going to back down. In fact, if it wasn't for Mattis, this thing would have spiraled out of control, because Trump, he just doesn't care what the consequences are. He just throws it against the wall and sees what sticks." Now, why didn't Russia do anything this time? That's because using the back channels, they had negotiated, worked it out to where nothing related to the Russians would be struck. Guaranteed. But the Russians were ready to strike back. You know who won in all of this? It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't even Assad. This was a victory for Vladimir Putin. Why? Because Vladimir Putin, he may not talk a lot, but people know he means business. He doesn't have to go on Twitter and brag and call people scumbags and talk about how the missiles are going to fly down, so get ready. He's not bombastic, but the man does what he says he's going to do. And the U.S. military knows, if Putin says, "I will fight back and fight like hell," they know that's going to happen. And the fact that Mattis went to Trump and said, "President Trump, you cannot get away with this. You cannot strike these targets like you and Bolton want to do without getting us into direct conflict with Russia." At least this time, cooler heads prevailed and Trump backed down. But you know what's going to happen? This is Donald Trump. What does he care about more than anything else? More than anything, he cares about buzz, positive media. And he is being savaged right now. He is being ripped apart by Republicans on the right who say, "What the hell are you doing?" He's being ripped by Democrats on the left who won't let go of the whole Russiagate thing. He is getting no positive attention. He is being mocked and ridiculed in the media around the world. And I know how Trump operates, and he is going to be furious over this. I would not be surprised if the next head on the chopping block is either James Mattis or one of his subordinates who Trump can fire symbolically to let Mattis know that that his job is next if he goes against Trump again. But Trump, to get the media attention back, he has to show how tough he is. Because this time he looks like a big wimp. That's what people are saying. I'm looking at reports. The people in Syria have been out in the streets all day waving flags and cheering, and all from country to country to country. As I check the reports, check the media reports of what they're saying around the world, they're all saying the same thing. Trump blew it. He talked big, but when it came down to it, he was a wimp and didn't do anything. This was just a symbolic act to save face because if he did anything real, Putin would put him in his place. Trump does not like to be seen as number two. So the next time this happens, with John Bolton there whispering in his ear, the devil on his shoulder, Trump next time is just going to go forward. We've seen this repeatedly there in the White House. He will listen for a little while to his advisors. John Kelly goes in there, General Kelly tells him how it is. Trump puts up with it for a little while, but Trump gets tired of it. He did the same thing with Bannon. He did it with all of these different aides. He gets rid of all of them after initially listening to them. But ultimately, Donald Trump does what Donald Trump wants to do, and he will purge his administration of anyone who opposes him. So this time around, we were spared from something bigger. But war is going to expand. With Bolton in there and with Trump's actions, we know what he's after. He's after war with Iran. What Russia is doing in response to all of this is they are building up defenses bigger than they were before. Vladimir Putin is talking about putting the S-300 into Syria. The S-300 is not as good as the S-400, but these anti-missile defense systems will knock everything out of the air. And for those who have read the news, you know that there are competing stories of what happened last night. The United States says they shot between 103 to 105 of these cruise missiles between them and their allies, and that every single one of them hit targets as intended. They say that Syria didn't even try and fight back, that they hit everything. On the other hand, you have Russia saying, no, not so fast. The Syrian air defense systems, which are outdated, they were still able to knock down 71 of the cruise missiles out of the 100-something. So it was actually a very low strike rate. So they're going back and forth. Who's right, who's wrong? Of course, I have no way of knowing an exact number, but I'll tell you this. The U.S., the Pentagon is not correct. They're outright lying, because I have seen not only photos, but several video clips of cruise missiles being shot down. And maybe I can get some footage of that posted for you guys to see. They're just small explosions in the air, but you can see the cruise missiles getting shot by anti-missile defense systems. And also photos of big parts of cruise missiles that had been blown up or on the ground. So for sure, a lot of these were knocked out. And the fact that you look at the amount of photos coming out of Syria, the damage that was done, and how minimal overall it was. If 100-something cruise missiles had actually landed, there would have been some serious destruction. But that the photos, the evidence suggests otherwise. This was not a successful strike, and this probably really sends a message. Russia stood back and they did nothing. They let the existing Syrian air systems take over, let the Syrians give it a shot, and they stayed out of it because they did have that backdoor agreement that none of their assets would be hit. And as Putin had told them, you hit anything substantial and you're in trouble. All of this would have been approved by Russia beforehand. This is how they de-escalated it. They let Trump have his symbolic gesture because Trump had to have something to save face, while at the same time nothing significant was actually hit. Well, folks, these are very interesting days indeed, and it's only going to get crazier. So I want you to share this video. Make sure you have subscribed. I do post additional content on my website at blackstoneintel.com. I thank you all for watching. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.